Evening everybody, my name's Chris and this is Retro Ratchet. So this is going to be the first of my trip down memory lane series, and I'm going to share with you car number 19, which is a 1983 Austin Ambassador 1.7L, and I hope you're all going to be really impressed with that unusual car choice. So if you want to find out a little bit more about the Austin Ambassador, how did I end up buying one, what did I do with it, any funny stories about it, and what was its fate, then stay tuned. So what I'll do is I'll give you a wee background on the Austin Ambassador itself. So the Ambassador is a facelift of the Austin Princess, which a lot of you will remember. Development work began on this in 1978. It was codenamed LM19 and the car was launched in March 1982. It unfortunately had a very short production run of only 2 years and was replaced in 1984 by the Austin Montego. If you want some Austin Montego content, you know where to go. The poor old Princess suffered from poor build quality right from the get-go and had a bad reputation as a result. It was agreed to make the Ambassador a hatch to try and make it more appealing to a wider range of people, but the front and rear lights were borrowed from a Morris Italia, so there's another useful fact. The makeover itself cost the business $29 million back in the day. So what else changed? Well, the interior was restyled. Most would argue that despite it being modernised, it did lose some of the traditional features that we saw in the Princess. They were a very comfy car with a very airy cabin, but still had obvious disadvantages versus competitors. They were only available with 4-speed manual or 3-speed auto. Top of the range models had no rev counter and they were pretty slow, which I can testify for, that's for sure, with the 1.7 that I owned. They had a top speed of 98 mph, a 0 to 60 of 14.8, all from its 83 brake horsepower 1.70 series. The 2.2 E series was later dropped, leaving just the 1.70 series, the 2 litre O series in single carb and twin carb format. The Ambassador unfortunately still fell short of expectations from what the masses wanted, but I still quite oddly fancy a Van Pla one. If anybody's got one lying about, please put in the comments. Although don't, because I don't need any more. Okay. Let's get into the backstory on EEE273Y, a bit of a peculiar registration number. So the car was bought brand new in January 1983 and it remained in the first owner's possession until 2005 when he sadly passed away. The car was then passed down to his grandson with only 56,000 miles on the clock. He, however, was not inclined to do any of the repairs necessary to keep the car on the road. Enter a 25-year-old Retro Ratchet into the equation after I responded to an online for sale ad. I travelled down from Teesside to Lincolnshire to view the car. It was about 150-60 miles and the agreement was reached that I could get the car free of charge on the basis that I kept it on the road and I didn't scrap it. And lo and behold, of course it needed welding because I'm like a magnet for these cars with no metal left. Work that one out. So I drove the car back home without hiccup. Next again day, I took a closer look to see exactly what it needed. So as you can see, there was quite a bit of welding, but it was isolated just to the near side sill, which was good. It wasn't widespread throughout the car. So I started by digging into the rear of that sill, as you can see. Now, if we look closely here, you can see that somebody had already been in there and had been tacking in a panel. It hadn't even been painted. I think it had just been undersealed over, which is why it's rotted. And it was covered with body filler. It seems to be a common theme in cars I buy, Knight Rider replicas and things like that, that they are full of filler and all sorts, which is not good. So the corrosion had actually spread into the inner sill. Not entirely surprised by that. So I started off by making a little plate there to close off that inner sill area. Weld onto that structural piece where the subframe mounts. Sorry, I don't know the name of that piece. And then I've done a square piece just to close off the top of that inner arch, just leaving a triangular section to do. Moving around the front, you can see I've done a patch there, parallel to the sill itself, and a rather peculiar looking gap followed by another strip of metal. Please bear in mind and go easy here because this was 20 years ago. I was at the start of my welding journey back then. I think they've improved a little bit. since then. Maybe not much, but I've certainly never tackled the wheel arch the same way as this since. The reason being, it actually flares out, that arch, and I just had no metalworking tools and I had no idea how I was going to do it. So that to me seemed the logical way. So what I've done is attack that shape in. As you can see, there's a different angle of it. And then I closed off that flared section there of the sill with just several other little patches and welded them in. So it does look a little bit messy, but it was absolutely solid. And of course, nothing was ground down in that picture there either. Moving along, I still had that bottom arch lip to weld in. I did leave them bigger, as you can see, so I could trim them all nicely down. And there you go in the last picture there, you can see that going in. Right, next job was the front of that sill, which was also a bit of a mess. So what I've done here is I cut off the bottom of the front wing just so I could get access to see how bad it actually was. And you can see there the corrosion, it's eaten through the inner sill, same as the back, and about an inch of the footwell as well. So I mean, not the end of the world. Access is actually pretty decent, as you can see, compared to the rear. So first job was close off that inner sill and then put a little patch repair in the floor, which you can see ongoing there. And then I did try and copy the original structure as much as possible. I don't know how accurate that was, but at the time it obviously seemed like the right thing to do. And you can just see that getting built up there layer by layer. And now you can see the outer sill itself being closed off there with a larger patch. And then moving round to a view from the front, you can see a triangular piece I put in there on the sill end cap, thus closing the whole area off completely. Then what I don't have a picture of is I welded just the bottom of that wing straight back on, rubbed it down and painted it. I will have rattle canned it back then, no different to now. What have we got here? Yeah, so what I was doing then is I was using a couple of layers of red oxide primer, followed by black Schutz stone chip on top. Who knows how effective it was? We'll get onto that later in the video. One last piece of welding that I found, there's a strip that runs along the sill. Somebody had already welded in a patch there, but it wasn't flush. It's a pet hate of mine in areas that are visible, non-flush patches. They just look terrible. Mark III Astra had one, the Escort had one, you know, they've all got them. So what I done is I cut that out and then I welded in a flush section there and I treated the rest of the surface corrosion, and then that was that sorted. So that was us squared away the welding, which was really by far the biggest job. So next job was to take the car for an MOT, which was in the December. I took it to my local station. It failed in two things, which was exhaust emissions and a leak from the exhaust itself. I fixed that the same day and I got it back promptly and I got my pass by the end of the day. So I was over the moon, as you would expect, for a free car. Right, everybody's got funny stories about cars they've owned. I've got 3 stories that I found funny, so I'd like to share them with you just now. First one day, had the car out, had it along the motorway, stopped it, parked it up, done whatever it was I had to do, came back to it, and it just would not run right. It was coughing and it was spluttering and there was an overwhelming smell of petrol. So I immediately turned it off, you know, stopped the car, turned it off, handbrake on, opened the bonnet, and to my horror, there was petrol pissing out of the carb vent filter like a fountain. Fortunately, the engine wasn't fully warmed up, or it could have had a very different outcome. It was pretty spectacular to see at the time, and I did have a bit of a panic on. I was just thinking I'll just run away from it. So that turned out to be a sticky carb float or needle valve. I stripped the whole lot anyway, cleaned it out, rebuilt it, and the problem never reappeared. Thank God for that. Story number 2, a couple of weeks after the MOT, I had the car up in Scotland, so I was driving it back from Edinburgh to Durham. This was in the height of the winter. It had been snowing. Pulling out the driveway in first gear, and it was super tight to get into gear. It just wasn't wanting to go in. It was really strange, like it was a synchro problem. Then trying to get into second as it was rolling, it was just crunching. So I took it straight back to the house, opened the bonnet, and I didn't seem to have any clutch function. Looked down at the slave cylinder and that was leaking fluid, so that was wonderful. So obviously you're not going to get a slave cylinder for one of those off the shelf. So all I managed to do was get 2 litre bottles of clutch fluid, stick that in the back of the car, top it up, to the brim, bleed it and hope for the best. Now, considering I was driving back on the motorway, I wasn't really going to use it that much, and the end of this story was it made it back with very little clutch function. So story number 3, I found this one kind of funny. Now, a lot of this information I haven't actually memorised from 20 years ago. I will let you into a secret. I found the for sale ad for it and it had loads of notes and technical information about the jobs I'd done in the car. So there you go. On the advert I wrote, it appeared to have a leaky heater matrix, which is why the carpet was wet. The cooling fan was jammed on permanently, but that was okay because then the engine would never overheat. And the driver's side window had actually come off its runner. But that was also okay because I just never bothered using it. So that made me laugh, that whole style of advert, listing all these things and reasons why they're not really problems. So I probably wouldn't take that approach in 2024. So moving on to the final chapter of EEE 273Y. What happened to it when it left my ownership in 2006? Well, I sold it to a local chap who kept it for 2 years. He then sold it to a bloke from Kent for £200. And this is where it gets interesting. He apparently took the car on a proper road trip right the way through Europe. So I was very surprised to hear that, but also quite pleased. And then a few photographs surfaced on social media to back up those claims. So that was really nice to see what had happened. But then sadly, in August 2009, it failed its next MOT on a faulty suspension unit. It had been leaking and it had sagged, and on offside welding, so probably the opposite of what I had done was needing to be done on the driver's side, and the decision was made to scrap the car. So that's a real shame. However, it still shows as SORN on the DVLA database. So does that mean somebody's got it tucked away somewhere, or whoever scrapped it just did not fill in the paperwork with the DVLA? That is weird. If you still own it, please put in the comments and send me some pictures. Have you owned an Austin Ambassador? More importantly, do you own one now? And you know what the last question will be is, if you own one now and you live in Scotland, would you let me do a review on it? Because it would be much appreciated. So let me know how you found this format of video. I'm not going to be able to cover all the cars because I have had over 100 and I don't have detailed photos of them all or interesting stories like I do for this one. But let me know if you enjoyed that. I'll keep on firing some of these out over the next few months, and I hope you found them entertaining. Please remember to like and subscribe. Everybody needs to subscribe. I'll catch you all next time.